All right, welcome back, everybody. Thanks for joining us here at the Training, Learning, and Development Community in our Not an LMS 2024 event. We're untangling the world of learning management systems here at TLDC, and we're so glad that you're sharing part of your day with us. Just if you're wondering, this session was originally scheduled to take place earlier today, but we had some technical issues. Those are resolved now, so I'm so glad to have Toddi back and in here to share with us creating a stakeholder charter for an LMS implementation. Let me tell you a little bit about Toddi. Toddi, with 15 plus years in L&D, specializes in innovative technologies and content development, currently consulting for a medical device company and a state health agency. She also fosters rescue dogs in southern New Hampshire, where she lives with her spouse. Pursuing a master's in community development, Toddi aims to create a nonprofit for training equity. And an award-winning filmmaker, her latest documentary has earned 12 film festival awards in 2024. That's awesome. So with that, Toddi, I'm going to go ahead and hide myself from the screen and let you take over.
All right, cool. All right, everybody. So it's really good to be here, and thank you for joining us again. This morning was a little bit of we had some hiccups with my audio, so lesson learned. I actually had tested it, but things happen, so all good. So I want to talk to you today about creating a stakeholder charter for an LMS implementation. And I've subtitled this Getting Collaborative Success Across Business Verticals, because that's really what this is. It's a collaboration effort. Let me scoot forward in my slides here. What I want you to think about. Okay, so first of all, what is a charter? But then also what's included in a charter. Okay, so included in a charter, and if you look anywhere in the project management world, and so this really does dive deep into the project management space, is if you look at this, you're going to find a lot of standard kind of, recipes for what a charter should look like when you're doing an implementation of any kind of software. Traditionally, that will be an executive summary that informs the executive teams about what you're accomplishing, what your goals are. You're going to look at basically stating the purpose of the charter being the agreement that you have amongst people, and then the goals of the charter itself, which is a little different from the implementation. So keep that in mind, that this is a different document. But I think it's one of the most important things you can do at the very beginning, because you're working typically across a larger organization. You can be with a small organization and be doing an LMS and still have a charter that actually really will help you. And let me just answer a really quick question on this. What's the difference between a project charter and a project plan? So I'm sure we have a number of project managers in this group. I'm Scrum certified. I do more agile development, but we have a lot of folks that are actually PMP certified through PMI. And so if you've ever seen any of this stuff online, you'll understand that a project plan is a very formal, approved document for your process from the beginning to the end, and that's all of your timelines. A project charter is different. It's usually not an approved document, but it is a document that can be almost a first draft, kind of informs the project plan. So keep in mind, again, this is a different thing. What it does do, though, is it is all about the people. So, this is the people part of it. This is the relationship building part of this. This is where you want to get it right. You want to get it right from the perspective of mapping out your stakeholders and determining who's going to be part of this initial charter. So that being said, let me scoot forward here. So there's the question, why would we do a document like this? Okay. And as I said before, it's about the people. So when you're getting an LMS ready to go live, whether you're implementing something new, you're making a selection about an LMS, you're migrating from one to another, you're restarting your old LMS with new tools. All of these things are going to involve your verticals across your company. I've actually done this 3 times in my life. So the first time I ever did this, I started with a really strong stakeholder group and a charter. And so I think, lucky for me, I actually discovered the value of this process. So, but let me tell you a little bit about why you should do it and what it can do for you. First of all, it's going to help you define who your stakeholders are. You're going to map those out. You're going to identify roles for each of those people. You're going to develop a set of governance, and the governance can be in 2 different areas. It can be governance of just this group and the process that it follows, but then they can also start to, if you really want to dive deeper, start looking at the governance for the LMS itself, for the learning management system. So the collaborative approach will ensure that you're identifying and representing each of those groups, each of those people. And you might find when you start talking to them, HR may say, okay, we're going to designate this person. Maybe engineering has a very specific designate, but you're still getting someone who can speak for each of these verticals. The things that can come out of this are pretty incredible organizational efficiencies. And so that can include cost, because I've actually been in situations where different organizations actually turned on different units in an LMS. And so there might have been an additional cost, or maybe from a budget perspective, you can determine who's going to do what. One organization may have needs for, just a basic LMS. The others may need to do additional, features turned on. So it's going to help you with the implementation, because you're going to be working across an organization. And again, it's the same kind of thing. It's setting up, what your configuration looks like across the organization, but it may be different within different verticals depending on their needs, because you can find companies that have very vastly different verticals. It helps with the security and support. So the security teams can go through and determine, okay, do we have internal users? Do we have external users? Do we have SSO? Do we have things that are backed up on the back end by, Microsoft tools that allow us to do SSO and full integrations? So these are the kinds of things that can be achieved through having a stakeholder group in a charter where they agree to meet and where they agree to communicate. Can help with onboarding and training. Same situation, you might have different training for different units depending on what's deployed to them. It helps with audience engagement. You can come with strategies across the audiences. And then also on looking at KPIs and outcomes. So these are good reasons to think about doing this. It's not an actual hard and fast requirement in like the PMI landscape, but it's actually a really good practice. So let me scoot forward here. All right, you guys can see my slides, I hope. Stakeholder identification. Again, I'm trying to scoot through on my own on this end. Okay, so this is where I'm going to tell you right now, get it right. I mean, if you're going to do something and you're going to take away anything out of this presentation, take away the fact that you really need to engage the right people right off the bat. And if you don't have the right people engaged, then that's where you can start to run into trouble. So, LMSs they're basically company-wide. Typically, they're a system of record, they're enterprise software, they're not cheap, they take time to implement. They're complex. And so if you can get the right stakeholders in the room at the right time and get everybody talking to each other, you're going to have a much easier process of this. So I would say this is one of your really key things that you need to do, is to start to identify who the stakeholders are, going through each of your verticals, talking to management, finding out who they want in the room, who they want to be able to make decisions, who they want to be able to test. Those are the kinds of things. And like most of this is super basic. We got another 40 some minutes maybe here. So I'm just giving you some ideas on where you can start. So, but to start to flesh out who the stakeholders are. So just thinking off the top of your head, like key stakeholders, you're going to be your management. Management may be able to identify other people within their groups that are product owners, especially process owners, especially when you're talking about training people to specific internal processes. It can be your sponsors, and your sponsors are really important in your change process. So you may have sponsors who are, they are your champions in either selecting, implementing, or re-implementing an LMS. It might be somebody like an accessibility specialist, okay, who's going to help you determine which features need to be turned on, what the governance looks like, as far as, you know, how the LMS gets out to the people, what features are included, you know, what's needed, that kind of thing. So, and who can test it. So, you know, you want to test these things as well. You're going to have folks from HR. You're going to have vertical leads, IT. ITs are going to be a really critical partner because this doesn't happen alone. You know, the systems actually, they need the security pieces put in place. They might need SSO. They might need somebody in the back end who does Azure. Microsoft Azure is basically where most permissions are set and most roles are defined. So if you have an SSO that gives somebody a very specific permission, internal, external, this is where it's going to happen. So you really need to think this through. And your end users, who are the most important people that you're ever going to serve with a learning management system, but you can't forget them. So be sure that you've got the right people in the room. And that might be HR business partners, it might be learning and development business partners. Just think that through. So can't stress enough how important that is. And I'm just looking at messages here. All right, okay. So again, stakeholder identification and mapping. And so that's an exercise. Once you've got your charter in place and your group starts to meet, you can start to define, okay, who are we missing? And so it's actually really important to put down, like on paper, who you're talking to, who's important, what their role is, what their decision points are. And even a RACI is really important for this kind of thing, because you may have somebody in the accessibility realm that has the ability to make decisions, and they are an important stakeholder. So let me scoot forward here. All right, so objectives and scope. All right, gotta scoot my own slides here. All right, so when you're thinking about the objectives and the scope, okay, you've got internal partners, and that's all the people that we just talked about internally. You've also got external partners. So you have the LMS vendor. Okay, so they're going to have success people that you work with, integration specialists. They may have coders on the back end that are helping you do specialized coding for specialized, you know, like it could be a custom field, it could be a custom report. And then you have integrators. And I've worked in the past with integrators that bring in other pieces of the LMS, and those might be specialized APIs that, you know, send data over to a learning record store, to a human resources information system. And it could be a third-party integrator of something like Skillsoft. So like, you know, when you bring in all the external content that becomes available to your end users. So consider all of your external partners when you're looking at the objectives and the scope of the entire project. So you're going to define the intended outcomes of the LMS implementation as part of your scope, looking at who your entire audience is. Okay, whether that's to be standardizing your training delivery, enhancing accessibility or inclusivity. I mean, these are things you need to think through and write down. Providing actionable performance analytics and KPIs, things like that. Or maybe it's just supporting compliance across your business. So those could be potential objectives, but those are going to become an important part of your written charters. What is the project objective? Additionally, you want to define the scope. Okay, so scope is what's included. Okay, it's also what's excluded. I actually had an example of a charter that I wanted to share with you guys. I probably need to go through and sanitize it. It actually came from a business that I worked for in the past, so it has all their markings on it. I'll see if I can go ahead and kind of pull some of that out and share it with you guys so you can see how we put this together. It was a one-page charter that specifically just defined, and it was for just one business unit out of an entire company, that defined what our goals were with that business unit, but also talked about what was in scope and what was out of scope. So, you know, it's important to say what we're not going to do, because maybe we want to keep some of the work that we're doing for the next phase, or maybe that's the next integration that we do. So think about that when you're building out your scope as well. So let me next slide. Okay. Roles and responsibilities. Okay, so, and I mentioned the governance team earlier. A governance team is usually set up to help guide the process. to help with decisions, approvals, and resolving problems. The team can be a governance of, just like I mentioned earlier, this particular group. They're setting up governance and helping set the rules. How are we going to play together? But it can also be really more focused on the governance of the LMS overall. And maybe that includes identifying like which things are going to be, ready for an audit, which things in the LMS are going to need to appear a certain way or be reported a certain way for audits. And again, like, hope I'm not overwhelming you guys, because these are huge implementations. But they can help you decide as the governance group, like who has what approvals, how do we achieve that process, what level does it have to go through. So additionally, I mean, just not looking at governance, but you're also going to look at the individual roles and what the responsibilities are for each one of these. And I alluded to it earlier, but it's not a bad idea to go through and define responsibilities for each stakeholder group, okay, whether or not that is approval of selection for the LMS itself, when they're going to hold roles within the LMS, whether they're going to help define what those roles look like. There's just so many different levels of this. And if we're just thinking specifically about the charter right here, we want to get started with defining the responsibilities of each stakeholder group within the charter first, okay? And that might be the best way to start before we start thinking more towards that project plan. And remember, I said this can become kind of a draft, like a draft document for the project plan, but let's think more specifically about the charter first and defining roles for people within this charter stakeholder group and what they do here and how they talk to each other. Then we can think further into, like, maybe somebody plays a role as something is tested or implemented. But the people we want to think about, again, project sponsors, okay, they'll approve budgets. They're going to help remove roadblocks. That really is what a project sponsor should do. And whether that's in the change management pieces or whether the selection, I mean, your sponsor is going to be a really big deal. Keep in mind your project manager is a really key person that you want to define roles for here. This is where the project manager is first introduced to everybody. Okay, so this is kind of level setting. Yes, this is our project management team. These are our roles. This is how it's defined. This is what we want to do. Your vertical leads may provide feedback. They may provide insight as far as processes and requirements. They may be the people that help you go through the business analysis to determine what's needed and what they need to test against. But the vertical leads are going to be really important as well. But again, you want to like really get fine-tuned on this and say, okay, which of these groups is going to help you determine which things? Okay, what are they there for? Your IT team. What is your IT team going to be doing for you? Okay, so I want you to think about those kinds of things. Like, are they going to be invited to every meeting? Do they need to be in every meeting? Do we need to only talk to them, when we have something that really touches having, some connection made or an API call made or something like that? A lot of times they do more technical things in terms of integration. So maybe they don't need to be part of every meeting where we're talking about the business analysis. And then your training teams, like not last, but definitely not least, they are a big part of this because these are the folks that are going to use this every single day. All right, next, decision-making frameworks. Okay, this can be part of your charter as well. It doesn't have to be super well defined at the beginning, but as you go along, you're going to probably figure out a little bit better about how you're going to set up your decision-making frameworks. And I think that will get fleshed out as you start to talk to each other. So you can determine, okay, how are we going to evaluate our choices? And that may be stack ranked. It may be like a certain percentage against, maybe a priority. First prioritizing, okay, the user experience. Maybe that's the most important thing. Accessibility, maybe that's the most important thing. How are we going to weight them? How are we going to evaluate them? Integrations, are they seamless? Are they instant? Does the product, give us instant integrations? Do we have to create a very specific brand new API to make calls against something that's not a really smooth integration, how much does that weight? Cost, scalability, can this scale as we grow? Like, we're going to be looking at all kinds of things as we set up our criteria. But that really is what this group is intended to do once it is formed and normed. And now they're storming, right? They're getting ready to go out and build out the criteria for the LMS. But this particular group, as long as they're collaborating, can help every group be represented. So we also here may start to form our approval checklist, and the approval checklist will be, shortlisting the selections that we make as we start to evaluate one vendor against another vendor against another vendor. As we come up with the must-haves, the nice-to-haves, and I don't know how many of you have ever been through the process of doing an analysis of alternatives. But what you find when you start to look at the requirements is that you will have hard and fast requirements that you absolutely have to adhere to. Some things will be nice to have. So, and this is also where you'll decide, okay, how are we going to have a user acceptance on this? Will we put this through a pilot test? Will we do a subset data group to go through and test? Are we going to do this across all the verticals, or is there a smaller subset of people who can help make that decision? So again, talking to each other and making these decisions will make our lives a lot easier across an organization when we're putting something out there that affects all of us. And then we'll look at things like, establishing a governance team that really just governs use of the LMS. Our project sponsor, we want to give them high power as well as our project management. They may have ultimate veto power across something that we do, but this is, where we start to kind of put our roles together. I know it sounds really complex. I know it is. It's definitely not for the faint of heart. So, all right, next set. One other thing that's really important, and you can probably tell from the last slide, is we need to develop a communication plan. So here I literally just put up like a super simple sample timeline for communication. Okay, just listing out, different phases. Okay, your launch, your vendor shortening periods where you're going through and you've decided now you're down to your final 3. Your piloting phase where you're going to go ahead and test, and during your implementation and post implementation. So as you can see, this is kind of the same thing you would do with any communication plan, but really looking at each phase, how we're going to communicate. Are we going to have email? Are we going to have a once a month meeting? Are we going to have a kickoff? Are we going to have weekly updates? So, this isn't exactly rocket science, but it is something that's really important to document out and determine how you're going to do this. One other thing to keep in mind, you have internal and external communication to think about. Okay, I just threw this out here, but it doesn't necessarily identify which one. I would encourage you, again, because we're doing a pretty robust job here of doing project management and looking at some tools that can help you for every one of these processes, okay, for developing everything you do. And making them shared tools, things that, everybody can look at. Like, I have 3 minutes, I want to see where we are in this process. I can get into Trello or Monday, or maybe it's in a Teams room or something, so that things can be asynchronous, because time is of the essence in business, right? And time is always moving very quickly. But if we can come up with really good collaborative tools, then we can start to keep people updated on what's happening. Even if they can't make it to a meeting, they're still being communicated with. External communication is defining how you're going to deal with your vendors. So trust me, you're probably going to have different types of communications with your vendors, just because of that relationship that you have with the vendor versus your internal teams. You're not going to be probably as open about some of the things that you might be dealing with internally. So, you may have a communication plan that calls for dealing with your vendors in meetings that are just maybe once a month. Maybe they come in and they speak to your key stakeholders about something that needs to be done and how they plan to solve that. Okay, but you have to know, again, how many times you're going to meet with these people. Who needs to be in the room? And it's my mindset is it's always better to probably have a little bit of overkill in terms of inviting people who maybe don't need to be somewhere rather than leaving people out. Because typically people can make a decision for themselves to say, okay, I think I can sit this one out. I'm probably not as critical. And it's like, yes, I know that leads to, inviting 20 people to a meeting, but I think it's a better way to do it than leaving people out. So it's just my own personal philosophy. But a communication plan is going to be part of your charter, even if you just let people know ahead of time. We're going to have a weekly check-in, on this time, this date. It'll be on your calendar. These are the types of questions we'll bring to the meeting. It really does level set what that is. And it gives them a chance too to say, okay, I have a question. I'm just going to put it on my notepad over here right now, but I'm going to keep it there for when I bring it to the meeting because I know that's the appropriate time to bring it up. So anyway, lots of things to think about here. All right. And key milestones and timelines. Okay, so when we get into milestones and timelines, that really is much more in the project planning phase. That's what we traditionally think of anyway. However, in a charter group, we can also have key milestones and timelines. And that may be as simple as milestoning out decisions about who's going to be included. Maybe we sit down, we brainstorm, we talk to people, we come back and we say, okay, this is a process owner that owns something that's really important. We want to bring them in. We can set deadlines for any of this kind of stuff. We can say, okay, this is our project plan. This is our milestone. Milestone 1 is we determine who. Milestone 2 is we've determined who they are. Now they're on our list. They know who they are. They've been communicated with. But just coming from that project management background, I think it's really important to be able to put these down on paper. The major phases that you're going to go through also could be documented. And if you want to go down this path and you want to start to document the things that you're doing as a group, okay, and again, this is the people collaboration, is the discovery, okay, the requirements. We're going to maybe plan out our vendor selection process, and that may be putting out the RFP, the request for proposal that outlines the basic needs that we have, the vendor evaluation, and this is just me. I mean, I've done this in the past several times, vendor evaluations against very specific business and analyzed criteria. Those are things that can be really important. Vendor selections usually work best, and this is just going back in my history, when you present someone with a problem that you've encountered maybe in another system and you want to see how they solve it. So vendor selection processes can get into the weeds of like, let's document what we want to see from these people, but we're also going to timeline when we're going to do that. So, we'll probably create some level of key milestones and timeline document for just the charter stakeholder group. They may look at pilot testing. They may look at, once we get through testing and we've decided that, it meeting spec for the most part, what's the full implementation look like? We want to have some ideas about when we're going to document, what the configurations look like, things like that. Like I mentioned before, some groups may have different settings, different configurations than others. It's going to include things as well on the rollout, like training and support. How are we going to support this? Who's going to support it? Do we have a ticket system? Do we have a help desk? So these are the kinds of things that your stakeholder group can not just talk about, but document and come up with their ideas moving forward about how things could get done or should get done. And again, like that document informs your project plan. Be sure and set really clear deadlines on all of this. Don't be wishy-washy on this, because projects really do need to be accomplished within a timeline. Like I said, I'm a Scrum Master, so I like sprints. If you want to do 2-week sprints, just set clear deadlines for certain deliverables, that's great. But set those expectations ahead of time and make sure they're very clearly communicated. All right, next one, budget and resources. So your budgets will also be part of your charter. Your budget allocations will be a big deal. You're going to have things to think about with your budgets, software, the implementation process, your training, the support does get to be something you really have to think about almost separately in terms of dollars, because you may have to bring in a ticketing system, um, and then the budget commitments. And I say budget, and that really means more like dollars allocated. But then you also have resources, which are our allocations as well, which will be the people's time. There are some businesses where every single person has to bill against a charge code. Maybe they've got, a client charge code for work that they do in this space, but then when they're doing this kind of work for an organization, they might have a different charge code that's been outlined for a project. So, you've got resource commitments, you've got budget things to think about. I'm being super brief here. Like, this is just really just super top level about things you could think about. But the budget and the resource allocations are things that this particular group can also, discuss and make decisions on. All right, risk management planning. This is kind of a weird one. It's not really weird because in every project you're going to encounter risk. You're always going to have a number of things that are kind of going to come with the territory. Resistance to change being one of the big ones. And then actually, the particular project charter that I have actually also involved a very in-depth change management program, which became how we accomplish the reimplementation of our LMS to a very specific vertical within one of my businesses that I worked in. But resistance to change is a big deal. So you have to think about the technical challenges. Okay. And this group can actually, because they're there to talk to each other and to get information from each other, can really start to talk through the things that could be considered risk. Even technical challenges. Most people understand if I say, we can't integrate to this piece of software that engineering uses, then okay, they get it. They may not have to know the nuts and bolts of the IT back end of it, but they can speak to it and say, okay, so what are the alternatives, or how can we fix this? So these are the people that are going to talk to each other. You're going to deal with potential cost overruns. You're always going to have something out there that you have to talk about that falls into the risk area. You can also, and this is the beauty of having this particular stakeholder group, which you can go back to and talk to, is that they can look for mitigations. Like, what can we do to mitigate resistance to change? And the change management campaign is going to be looking at, how do we get our stakeholders involved so that, they're really engaged in this process? Do we have change champions? Do we have a change management program? Have we created documents that make it really easy for someone to learn the new task? You can mitigate with adjusted timelines. If something is unrealistic, can we go back and rescope a little and say, okay, well, we can't do it because we've got a major project within this business unit, but can we push it out? Okay, so this group, again, is at that top level talking to each other. And we can talk about funding. So, these are places where we can really start to, say, all right, we can manage this project in so many different ways with just a stakeholder group. That's, their entire job is to talk to each other. All right, scooting forward here. There's other issues to think about with respect to your entire charter project. And I'm not downplaying any of this at all, just because we're towards the end of the deck. But in fact, some of these can be your absolutely first point that you're going to start with when you start talking to each other. But you have different needs within the organization, and sometimes you're not always going to see these things surface right away. Accessibility and compliance. So these are big deals because depending on your industry, first of all, you're going to need to look at accessibility as much as you can. We all want to do that. We want to make materials and platforms accessible. We want to be able to test these and make sure. That's why we want to bring in that accessibility specialist very early on. I put together some, just a word cloud of ideas here, but there's a lot that goes into this. And we've done full conferences on accessibility. But these are things we need to think about because our users are not one size fits all by any means. You want to make sure that you're hitting the mark, at least the basics, with respect to, you know, someone who has any level of disability, or making their user experience better. Additionally, depending on your industry, you might be dealing with European specs like GDPR, which is the Privacy Act for the European Union, HIPAA, if you're in a medical company, and maybe somewhere in that system you've got, you know, basically information on somebody's medical or personal health, and those are big deals. PHI, okay, personal health information, and I've worked in the pharma industry in the past where we've had to really think about the PHI aspect of an LMS selection and an implementation, and the moving over the data and how that's handled. You're going to have security requirements as well, which I hadn't put down here. That kind of dovetails into FedRAMP certification, which is a security standard. I've worked for DoD companies in the past where that was the absolute number one starting point for selection of an LMS, is because everything that we did was based on a federal contract, and every single thing that we did had to align to a security standard. And most of the time, I would say 9 times out of 10, any systems that we brought in had to be FedRAMP certified. And there's different levels. There's SOC 2, which is a security standard, and then FedRAMP certification goes a little bit above that. And so it became a situation where we had to go through and start looking at where people were on their own certification paths before we could even say, yes, you can come in and demo to us. So that in one of the instances that I worked on brought our selection criteria way, way down, because at that time, I don't know, I think there might have been 3 LMSs out there that actually carried that standard or had engaged in starting it, like they were, you know, level 2 FedRAMP certified. And I think it was Cornerstone and Adobe and someone else. But you've got all kinds of things to think about. And, you know, somebody needs to be that voice that says, hey, we're DoD facing. We can't do anything unless we actually look at something that is got a FedRAMP certification, or we're dealing with personal health information here. We can't do anything that doesn't handle PHI. So just think about that, and you know, like these are just other things that this charter group needs to think about. I actually just looked, Nicole said she'd love to see a sample charter to look at. Nicole, I do have one. So I can share that with you. And this is for a much smaller scale project. But I'll also ask around and see if anybody else has some of these. Of course, most of this stuff is stuff that you can't take with you after you've left an organization. But let me see if I can find one. I'm actually going to put a couple links in here in the end too. One of those is for different project management blogs that actually discuss what the charters look like. And there are some templates available, so you don't have to start from scratch on this stuff. All right. So again, one more thing to think about, but your group, your stakeholder group is going to be the one to kind of help define this. And the way I think of the stakeholder group and its charter is that it really is a precursor to building out a really strong project plan. And if you guys can think of it that way, then you can really understand the value of this group, even though the charter itself is not an approved document. It's not really part of the process. But this is really like that entire process of brainstorming and working together to determine how we're going to arrive at the end, where we can say what our acceptance criteria is or what our success metrics look like. So that being said, we'll bring it back around and talk a little bit about success metrics here. I just threw a couple things down. Again, like I'm talking at everything at the cloud level here, you know, way up high versus where you're going to be within your own businesses, where you're going to be really focusing in and looking at what matters, what resonates with our leadership. The KPIs can be things like adoption rates. Okay, how quickly is a system adopted? How quickly are people using it? A new tool without any tickets. You know, you can look, and I love ticketing systems. They're always a source of great information. what is the accessibility compliance after we've gone through and we've tested something, maybe with a screen reader, or we've tested it with our populations? What is the adherence of something to compliance? If that is a really important part of a requirement, are we meeting those requirements? What are the user satisfaction scores when someone goes through and uses this? And don't just think about end users, think about your admins too. Like, what kind of satisfaction scores are you getting from your administrators and from people who are considered instructors who may go in and create classes? What are the users saying? Is it easy to use? Are you seeing hiccups? Those are the kinds of things you want to pay attention to from a metric standpoint. But in order to measure those, you need to kind of start with a baseline. Like, if we're starting to be, we don't have any of this data, those first sets of data are going to be what we measure against. So it may take time to actually get to the point where we actually see true success metrics, or we see that we're improving our processes. It can be completion rates of e-learning. It could be the amount of time it takes for someone to register for a course, how many clicks, how many interactions. So just, you want to define what these are. And then it may go all the way to the end of the process of looking at, are we improving performance within our businesses? So, you want to be thinking about this. And again, I just threw a really quick sample in here of what some of your metrics might look like. In this case, I'm saying audience attendance, engagement. This is probably more for virtual stuff where you can actually measure how engaged somebody is, whether or not they've got one window open. And believe it or not, systems can tell this a lot of times, what Q&A interactions look like. But, you can establish this metric, these metrics for, this project, but you're going to be able to do it best with stakeholders because they're going to be able to give you feedback from their perspective of what matters most. Okay, change management. I mentioned this a couple of times. This is another thing that you may want to include into your charter, is what kinds of things you're going to think about with respect to change management. Are we going to engage in a full up change management program? Do we need to? Is our group a group that will go ahead and take a new tool and run with it? Do they feel comfortable with it as long as they've got a quick reference guide? Or are they super resistant and they're kind of grinding their heels and saying, this doesn't work for us, you're going to have to prove it out? Okay, so you may have different levels of change management here. But you want to think about this as part of your stakeholder group. You may want to, just at least chat it through and say, okay, we need to start thinking about what each group may need, which are going to be most resistant, how we're going to put this in place. Are we going to do it with training? Or are we going to make sure that everybody gets a training class? Are they all of a sudden going to have QRGs that are on their desk for when their new systems are launched? Are we going to have a piece of e-learning that teaches them how to do it? Are we going to give them support? And that can be part of change management, by the way. Are we going to give them a help desk to call or a ticket system to log issues with? And with that comes a whole lot of other things, like what is the SLA and the turnaround time for the help that we give them. So we have to think all of this through from a kind of a change management perspective, especially if we expect adoption, early adoption, continued adoption, and continued feedback from our users, which is actually another piece of change management. We don't want to engage in this as a single directional thing. We want to start to be able to understand the feedback and make changes as that feedback is coming into us. So, we know if there's something missing, and we get that from engaging in change management with our ultimate end users, and whoever they might be. They might be employees or admins or other trainers or instructors. They might be externals. They might be like our sales, the people we're selling to, or our bar channel partners. I mean, you never know who we're using within these systems, because these systems are often built to serve multiple groups. But we want to think through how we're going to get feedback and how we're going to support every population that's using that learning management system. All right. Approvals and sign-offs. This is a big deal. This is actually probably one of the most important things you're going to do in this charter group. Within the stakeholder charter group, we're going to determine what approvals look like and what a sign up is going to look like and what an acceptance is going to look like. And again, this is always, again, going to inform our final project document, but it's going to allow us to start thinking about what sign-offs look like. Okay. You know, who's gonna sign the LMS contract? Does that go to contracts? Does that get signed by the CEO? You know, these are all things that we need to think about. And this is where, again, you know, we have defined at the very beginning what the stakeholder roles are. So hopefully this is actually a pretty easy place for us to say, okay, the defined role of this particular stakeholder as the project manager is they are the first level signer of the contract, and then the contract goes to the CEO, and the CEO co-signs, and then it goes to contracts, and contracts looks it over and comes back and says, okay, now it's officially signed. Now we officially have an agreement. But this is a place where we can start to look at what it takes to get us there, you know, and what process we've already gone through to get to this point. Now we understand who is going to actually make it so, right? So again, more things to think about. But it's a process that I've done for a while, and like I said, I've done 3 different implementations that used a stakeholder group and an official charter for that group. And I would highly recommend that you guys actually like consider doing this. And it doesn't have to be as deep and as crazy as this, but it does have to have some basics around it. I mean, the summary, the goals, the objectives. You know, initially it's going to have an executive summary that says what we're doing. You know, these are the things that should be part of it, but then you can expand from there. So I'm actually seeing a lot of interesting things in the chat too. So do you guys have questions about this? And by the way, I can share this with you. I can actually share a very much smaller stakeholder charter that I had with some folks in the past that I can share with you. I have a full out change management plan that I wrote, gosh, I'm trying to think of how many years ago I wrote. It's probably been about 7 years ago that I probably should have published, and I could still publish actually. There was a unique case, and actually it was a secondhand try to get an LMS in place for an aviation group. But it was an interesting thing that we did. So I can actually share that. It was something that, you know, I had to go through and sanitize for a college class because I didn't want to reference who it was, actually was. And I took the names out and changed it, but the story was still the same. So I have those things. And I'm happy to share them with anybody if you guys want to email me or contact me. And I did tell you too, I'm going to drop a couple of links in here to you as well. Hang on, let me grab these. Why can't I grab these links? Nope, that's not working. I'm gonna have to find another way to do that. Okay, so looks like some people are curious about use cases. The sample charters, which are definitely very helpful. 1 second, I'm gonna actually shut down my other, there we go. Now I should be able to grab these links. Hang on, I'm gonna give you guys a couple of these. Okay, so Asana Tools has a really nice section on project charters, and the Institute for Project Management actually has one too. So I'm going to give you guys these resources too. Okay, alrighty. So you'll find samples. You're going to find templates in these places for putting this together. You know, and actually Nicole is asking, would I use a RACI and a charter? Charter would inform the RACI. Yes. And I love the RACIs. You know, I think probably almost everything we did on my second implementation of a learning management system was done against a RACI. Extremely well defined about who was being informed, who was, you know, needed to be in the know. And that was actually part of our communication plan. Who was a signer, you know, who needed to edit or make contributions. The organization that I worked for was extremely big on using the RACI to define roles and responsibilities. Sometimes I find that organizations don't touch this at all. And I think it's really important to do that because, then you really start to understand what does that process look like in order to get things done. So yes, it definitely would. Um, okay. Nicole says they had a small team. They used Eraser while she was an LMS admin, but had a small team, 5 designers to me. I have to tell you, that doesn't even feel small to me these days. I think that feels big. A lot of times you find yourself all on your own. That's something else I really want you guys to walk away from with this, by the way, is if you are a single person and you are charged with implementing a learning management system or making a decision, or maybe IT has already made a decision, somehow it fell in their bucket with respect to an LMS and a selection, please don't think you can go it alone, because you really can't. Even if something has already been pre-selected based on a set of criteria that wasn't defined out by a stakeholder charter, it's never too late to go back and say, I need to go ahead and establish a stakeholder group first off that has complete ownership. And I always say that, there's a book called Extreme Ownership. The people on that group should all decide that they are extreme owners of the LMS. It's never too late to go back and say, okay, this isn't just a me job. This is something that we should be doing together and doing collaboratively, because you're going to get the best use cases and the best success and at the end the best success metrics if you're working collaboratively across your organization. So if you guys don't walk away from this with anything else, please walk away with that, because I know so many of us end up being lone wolves. And that's a tough place to be with the LMS, is when you're the only person putting something in place or one person is charged with that. That should not be. This is a tool across an organization. Louise, do we have any questions? I don't see any questions. Let me go back through here again.
Yeah, not seeing really any questions.
You
Let's see.
guys can already, yeah, you can even.
Shauna did ask earlier about the recording, so it'll
Okay.
be available right after, but also looking interested in the slides as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I would encourage you guys to go to like either that, Institute for Project Management as well, to look at what's available as far as templating. And they're always going to tell you pretty much the 3 basics, which is going to be your exec summary and your goals and your objectives, and basically outlining who your stakeholders are. But sometimes they'll expand on that as well. Let me see, I see another message. Oh, Q says that this presentation was hot toddy. Ha ha ha. You're a funny guy. I
Never heard that before.
No, never heard that. And probably I've heard it before from Q. So just reiterates the fact that we need an in-person meeting at some point. I actually haven't seen Q since 2020. So
Oh my gosh, too long. It's been too long.
way too long. So anyway, but yeah, this is kind of the dull part of putting together a learning management system decision or an implementation. But it'll be probably the one piece that's going to keep you from feeling like, oh my gosh, I didn't ask that person.
Right.
You don't want to be in that position and realize, oh my gosh, we didn't ask this vertical group, because that's not a comfortable place to be. So
well, that's the thing, is like sharing this is so important. I think that I was it was definitely like, for somebody that has never implemented or worked, building out an LMS or anything like that. I was just kind of like, wow, there is a
yeah,
lot of stuff there.
a lot.
And you did it. You were able to explain all of it really, really well, Toddi. So thank you so much.
Yeah, it's unique because it's not a document that's traditionally used.
Right.
But it is, if you can get consensus at this level, then it really does inform your project plan in a big way. So,
Yeah.
it's just, again, it's the people part of it, right?
Right. Well, I mean, every once in a while you see these questions pop up. Like, I'm a solo instructional designer for my org, and I have to do all of this work. Where do I even start? This recording is going to be a great resource, Toddi. So
Cool.
amazing. Thank you.
And definitely welcome questions too. Anybody can hit me up on LinkedIn, or I've got my email there too. So I've done a few of these. It feels actually, I think the first time I implemented a system was in 2012. So I've been doing it for a while, and learning management systems, they change, but not a lot in terms of implementations. There's a lot of question about whether we'll continue to use them. And I honestly think this is my honest opinion, is that as long as we have a need for compliance, the LMS is pretty much here to stay. We've got to have good record keeping for audits and for that compliance piece. So it may change its form. We may all learn in a different way, but I don't think we're going to see it go away anytime soon. So,
Yeah. Gitzall's adding more of his
oh,
webinar interrupting commentary.
well, it's sort of funny. I was just thinking about this the other day. So I go back to 2016 with TLDC, and I was thinking, where are all those interrupters at? The ones I mean.
Right.
There were like 7 or 8 of them before they would get started on Dungeons and Dragons in 2016. You're like, wait a minute, come back on topic, guys.
Right. All right. Well, Toddi, thank you so much. You just shared so much great information. Tomorrow, everyone, we have a panel first thing in the morning, 8 a.m. Pacific time, 11 a.m. Eastern. Please join us for that one. And then there is another session that I'll be adding to the schedule for tomorrow, which I think was that at 10 a.m. that Kathy was interested in doing.
Yeah, okay. It's 10 a.m. PT one. Kathy, yeah, if she's still available for that one.
All right, so we'll I'll be adding that to the agenda. Hopefully, we'll see all of you tomorrow. Thanks again, Toddi. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and close the session. Bye, everybody.
All right, take care, everyone.